Raspberry Pi Reboot the Internet. This is a 2022 special. It's kind of timely because the Raspberry Pi, which I bought for about $35, has inflated in price to about $320. So, if a Reboot the Internet build sounded a bit far fetched or conspiratorial uh, a year ago, 2 years ago, at this point, maybe people are taking it a little more seriously. So here we go. Let's do the teardown. First step is remove the door. Next, we'll pull out the detachable keyboard. I never attached the keyboard to the mounting plate, and there's not much clearance on this thing. There we go. Nice little deplorable security devices logo. And now let's start tearing down the back of this thing. Okay, looking at the back side, there's 4 nuts that hold the inner assembly in place. So we'll just pop those off. They were tightened. They've been loosened for dramatic effect. You can hear the insides are about to slide out of there. So it's probably going to drop on the table, make a bunch of noise. If I had a stand for my phone, I would use that and use 2 hands, but I do not. Okay, so those 4 bolts are loosened. Now the inside can be pulled out. So here's a first look at the guts. And you can see with that I went with the rat's nest wiring approach, which you do not have to do. We'll just go over the components here quickly. Of course, you're familiar with the face here. Got a screen, power button, USB, Ethernet ports on the back side. We have the battery. I made a really fancy holder for it, but found out that zip ties work just as well, so why not do that? So I'm going to disconnect the 12 volt from the regulator. The fan is hardwired in there. This connector goes out to the power button. So I'm just going to disconnect that. Like an idiot. Takes forever. That was really hard. What else? But just taking a look at this, you can see it's all mounted on these rubber isolators. So there's a little bit of shock and vibe relief there. We can't really see much inside, so I'm just going to start taking these screws out. Okay, using a metric number 3, I believe these are M4s, to pull out these corner mounting screws. And since this is going on the internet, I'll try and fake that I'm an organized person, for no one's sake, really. Especially when we get to this part, you see me just pull out this absolute rat's nest. One of the reasons that this rat's nest is okay is that all these wires are insulated for way more than the rated voltage of this device. So as long as you don't crank any connections physically out of their socket, this isn't pretty, but it works. If you're like me, sometimes you just lose patience and want to move on with your day rather than routing a bunch of wires really neatly. What do you think? Yeah, needs to be neater. She just heard rat's nest. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to start unplugging connectors. Some Ethernet connections here, and my goal is to just take this, split the front panel that we unbolted from the back panel. So disconnecting HDMI, USB power. We have some audio jack. Another reason this is such a mess, it's just I didn't take the time to source like the exact right wire lengths, so I just kind of went with like the cheapest thing on Amazon. So if like there was a 3-foot USB cable, I just used the 3-foot version instead of like a fancy little 1-foot version or something like that. So there's no reason you couldn't do a little bit nicer job on this if you're the kind of person who likes to do that thing. Okay, so here's a great example. There's about a 3-foot USB cable in here. And I can just see all the people who wanted to build this project at home, and they're like, oh, it's so nice. Well, maybe they didn't say that, but it looks so organized on the outside, and the inside's just a complete clusterfuck. So maybe you're a little disappointed now. Maybe not. Maybe you love it. Let's see. So, really the only thing left here are the power connections and the Raspberry Pi. So let's take a look at that. So we have, here's the Ethernet switch and the battery. So like I said, I originally designed some plates that would get mounted into these holes. But as I was fitting this up, I realized 2 zip ties work much better. So I just changed the design and added those slots. So now on the back side, you can kind of see the power situation a little more clearly. So what we have going on here is a regulator that takes 12 volts in, 5 volts out. So we have 12 volts that gets connected to this power switch on the front plate. That 12 volt power does not get switched by the big red switch. The 12 volt power goes right here, and coming right out of that 12 volt power is the battery connection. So that is charging that battery bank up. You make sure you turn that battery bank on before you put this in the box. So that's the input for the battery and the power connector. Coming right off of that, I have 12 volts that goes to the fan, and that was a mistake. I would put that on the 5 volt pins if I were to do this again. Actually, no, I would connect that to the Raspberry Pi, because what happens, this converter is always on, so even if this was on the 5 volts, it's just on all the time and it wastes power. Anyways, coming off of that 5 volt side, we have the power for the Raspberry Pi, and that power actually gets broken out to this plug, which goes to the big red switch on the front panel. Man, maybe I should make a schematic. Yeah. Anyways, pretty simply on the back is the Raspberry Pi, and talk about inflation. This is a $100 Jetson Nano that I bought a couple years ago, and that also fits in here. With the new design files, the files you'll see on Send Cut Send, there's actually some more mounting holes to mount the Jetson Nano on here. But that'll mount right there, and the fan is still in the correct place to blow air over the Jetson Nano heatsink. Uh, so that's kind of the teardown I wanted to do before I do a detailed build video. I'm just working a lot and don't have a lot of time to play with this stuff as much as I love it. So you basically have the plate from Send Cut Send, a bunch of M4 standoffs, more M4 standoffs, some rubber isolators, 12 volt 5 volt regulator, battery, 4-port hub, Raspberry Pi. On the back, these are all just the panel mount connectors that get plugged into these devices, and of course the touchscreen for the Raspberry Pi. So I think with these parts you could really do a nice clean build, or you can just kind of shove all this shit in the box and close the lid and go on with your life. But there you have it. You have the ammo can, 4 holes drilled in the bottom. There's the touchscreen panel and the interior guts of it. So the 2 parts you get from Send Cut Send are this panel and this panel. This one I just painted green to make it look cool. Here's the little tiny super thin computer keyboard, excuse me. And then this is like an optional plate. I think I took off some of the lettering. If you guys really want lettering, I can put that on there. If you're really super nice, I'll put custom lettering on there. I just call it the Rugged Pi 001. Maybe I need to up-rev that. Deplorable security devices. These are little places to zip tie down a connector. So if you wanted to put a connector in this keyboard, you could zip tie that in there. This just looked cool. It says reboot. And this says ROSE, so that's remote operated weapon system. So these are actually designed to control the turrets that are being worked on. And you can check out my other videos to see how that's going along. But thank you all very much for watching.